July 2014. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, a 15-year-old girl disappeared without signs of a struggle. But she left behind something even more disturbing: a note. It said she wanted to leave, that no one should look for her, that disappearing was her choice. To the police, it looked simple: another teenager running away. But to one person, none of it made sense. Her mother looked at those words and immediately felt something was wrong, because it was her daughter's handwriting. But it didn't sound like her. Over the next few hours, details began to emerge that were impossible to ignore. A phone completely wiped clean, cash withdrawn just hours before she vanished, and a boy who seemed far too eager to insist he knew nothing. What began as a teenage love story in a quiet town would turn into an investigation spanning years, involving lies, hidden recordings, overlooked evidence, and one haunting question: what really happened to Megan Page Nichols that night? This is the story of a disappearance that looked voluntary, until someone found what had been buried. Hello, beautiful people. I'm Maya, and welcome to another episode of Never Forget, where every case reminds us that the world isn't always as safe as we believe. Megan Page Nichols was born on July 18, 1998, in Evansville, Indiana. She was the daughter of Katie Jo Nichols and John David Jackson Nichols. Her mother was 19 years old. Her father did not remain in her life. 15 days after Megan was born, Katie moved with the baby to Fairfield, Illinois, a small town in southern Illinois with about 5,000 residents, where everybody knows everybody. It was the kind of place where high school football is a community event, where people go to church on Sundays, and where teenagers dream of leaving as soon as they graduate. Katie raised Megan on her own during her early years. She was very young, but she built a bond with her daughter that people rarely see between teenage mothers and daughters. Years later, she would say she would not recommend becoming a mother so young, but that it created a unique connection between them. When Megan was still a child, Katie married Jared Hutchcraft. He became Megan's stepfather, and the three formed a family in Fairfield. Megan grew up being exactly the kind of girl everyone loved having around: energetic, charismatic, funny. She participated in everything at school. She was a cheerleader, played volleyball, performed in the school band, sang in the school choir, and also in the choir at Fairfield Baptist Church, where she attended youth group. Friends described Megan as someone who tried to bring laughter and happiness to everyone around her. She attended New Hope School, a school with fewer than 200 students. In 2013, she reconnected with her biological father, who lived in Oklahoma. They had lost contact years earlier when she was still a child, but the reunion went well. Megan missed having a father figure, and they began talking regularly. In the fall of 2013, Megan attended the homecoming dance at Fairfield Community High School. Just for context, homecoming is an American high school tradition held every year at the beginning of the school year, usually in September or October, celebrating students returning to school. It differs from prom, which is reserved for seniors. At homecoming, everyone can participate, from freshmen to seniors. That was where Megan reconnected with Brody Moorberger. They had known each other since middle school, but had never been close. Brody was 2 years older and in another grade. They became closer while Megan was in 8th grade, and even closer once she entered high school and joined Glee Club, the school choir. But it was homecoming where their friendship turned romantic. Brody was born in April 1996, the son of Jason Moorberger, an Illinois State Police officer. Brody's mother had died tragically in January of that same year, only a few months before the dance. She became trapped in a flood, her car was swept away by the water, and her body was later found beneath ice. The cause of death was hypothermia. Brody was grieving, and during the dance, friends noticed that he frequently mentioned his mother's death. He was enrolled in AP honors classes, advanced college-level courses offered in American high schools, and was considered one of the smartest students in his class. He was blonde, athletic, and witty. Years later, one of Megan's friends, Holden Algos, would describe him by saying he was handsome, funny, and smarter than most people in the room. It was easy to understand why someone would fall for him at homecoming. Brody had arrived with a girlfriend, and Megan was there with someone too. But they ran into each other on the dance floor, abandoned their dates, and spent the rest of the night together. The boy who brought Megan ended up alone because she spent the whole night with Brody. Brody's girlfriend, realizing she had been replaced, cried in the bleachers. The entire school talked about it. Brody ended the night with Megan, but afterward he got back together with his girlfriend. That was when the real problem started. He returned to his girlfriend but could not stay away from Megan. They texted constantly, met in secret, and he was essentially involved with both girls at the same time. At the beginning of 2014, Megan's mother discovered the relationship and also found out Brody already had a girlfriend. Katie did not approve. She told Megan she deserved more than being involved with someone already in another relationship. She warned her it was unhealthy and that Brody was manipulating her. Megan listened but disagreed. She was only 15 and in love. So the police showed the footage to Katie and pointed out that Megan appeared to be alone. But then, Katie noticed something the police had missed. In the same footage, farther in the background, there was a parked car. It was a Dodge Avenger, the same model Brody owned. And in the footage, after Megan got on her bike and left, the car left too. Katie tried to tell police this was suspicious, that it looked like his car, and that he might have been following Megan, but police dismissed it as coincidence and said the video proved absolutely nothing and that Megan had probably run away. The Fairfield Police Department was led by Keith Cole Clesure, and from the beginning they treated the case as a runaway case, not a disappearance. They assumed that from day one, because Megan had wiped her phone, left a note, and withdrawn cash. To them, everything supported that theory. They interviewed Brody during the first days, and he denied any involvement in Megan's disappearance. He claimed they were just friends and said there was nothing romantic between them. But then police examined his phone. They found over 7,000 text messages exchanged between them and realized the messages clearly showed they were in a relationship, including a sexual relationship, and had discussed running away together multiple times. Brody changed his story. He admitted they had been involved, but claimed that on July 3rd, the day Megan disappeared, he had been at his girlfriend's house. He was seeing both girls at the same time. Police interviewed the girlfriend, and she confirmed he had spent part of the evening with her. Years later, she testified that unexpectedly he left in the middle of the night and only returned hours later. Her identity was never publicly released, most likely because she was a minor. She was the same age as Megan and was also in Glee Club. Court documents referred to her only as Brody's girlfriend. Police could not confirm where Brody had been between 9 p.m. and midnight. Those 3 hours matched the exact time Megan had been left alone at home while her mother was away. It was the window in which she disappeared. Police documented this information, but they had no witnesses, no body, and no physical evidence. Without enough proof, Brody continued with his life. He graduated and enrolled at the University of Southern Indiana to study geology. He moved to Evansville with his best friend Skylar. Meanwhile, Katie continued searching for Megan. Fairfield police eventually closed the case. Katie never believed her daughter had simply run away, but authorities refused to reopen the investigation. In 2015, 1 year later, the case was transferred to Illinois State Police. Still, the investigation stalled and no one knew what had happened to Megan. Then, on December 26, 2017, 3.5 years after Megan disappeared, a man was cutting firewood in a rural area south of Boylston in Wayne County, less than 9 miles from Fairfield. It was an even more isolated area, surrounded by farmland, scattered properties, and dense vegetation. The kind of place where you could drive for miles without seeing a single house. The man was on private property preparing wood for winter when he noticed something unusual on the ground. They looked like bones. He called police. Investigators arrived and discovered human remains in a shallow grave. The body had been wrapped in a blanket and had likely been there for years. Authorities collected the remains and sent them to Bloomington, Illinois for a preliminary autopsy. Later, they transferred everything to the FBI Forensic Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. On January 26, 2018, 1 month after the discovery, the FBI confirmed through DNA analysis that the remains belonged to Megan. Her death was ruled a homicide. Megan had been strangled or suffocated. Her body had been buried less than 9 miles from her home and had remained there since 2014. With confirmation that Megan had been murdered, the FBI took over the investigation. Special Agent Ray Hort was assigned to lead the case. He reviewed everything from the beginning: Brody's interviews, the messages, witness statements, and decided to revisit something local investigators had tested years earlier without success: Brody's car. Back in 2014, shortly after Megan disappeared, investigators had discovered a dark stain in the trunk of Brody's Dodge Avenger, the same car seen in the surveillance footage. A preliminary test came back negative for blood, but in 2016, Brody was involved in a car accident. He reportedly blacked out behind the wheel and crashed into a tree. The vehicle was declared a total loss and sold to a salvage yard. The salvage yard later sold the car to a couple in Missouri. Agent Ray tracked them down and asked permission to examine the vehicle again. They agreed. This time, the FBI performed full forensic testing. The results were positive. The stain in the trunk was blood, and DNA confirmed it belonged to Megan. When the FBI confronted Brody again 3 years later, he changed his story once more. He claimed the blood came from a sexual encounter they had and that Megan bled. He said he cleaned it using his shirt and later tossed the shirt into the trunk. He also said the trunk leaked water, something his father confirmed. According to Brody, that explained how the blood spread throughout the trunk. He said he later threw away the stained shirt in a ditch. It sounded possible, but it did not prove innocence. Investigators kept digging. They decided to speak with his best friend, Skylar. In 2018, the FBI approached Skylar and explained their theory: the blood evidence and Brody's relationship with Megan. They asked whether he would wear a recording device and try to confront Brody to see whether he admitted anything. Skylar hesitated. They had been best friends for years, roommates, people who trusted each other. But the FBI continued presenting evidence: Brody's repeated lies, the blood evidence containing Megan's DNA, and all the inconsistencies. Eventually, Skylar agreed. During 2 separate conversations, Skylar turned on the recorder and casually brought up Megan. He tried to get Brody to talk. Brody never confessed. But he said something investigators had never publicly disclosed. He suggested that someone could have been very angry with Megan and might have strangled her, that whoever had anger issues could have discovered something and killed her that way. This became a critical moment. Authorities had never released that Megan's cause of death was strangulation or suffocation. So how did he arrive at that exact theory? That was information only investigators and the killer should have known. Skylar handed over the recording. Years later, he said it was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He felt he had betrayed his best friend, but believed it had to be done. Then, on October 7, 2020, 6 years after Megan disappeared, Brody was arrested. He was working in Evansville when state investigators coordinating with the FBI arrived and took him into custody without resistance. Shortly afterward, investigators executed a search warrant at his apartment in the Lakewood West complex. But by then, 6 years later, he no longer lived with Skylar. Their friendship had fallen apart after the recordings. Skylar wanted to pursue law school and move back to Fairfield, while Brody remained in Evansville living alone. Skylar would later say he was not surprised by the arrest, because from the day he heard that recording and that specific theory from Brody, he already knew. He said, quote, I knew what he was, but it was very hard to accept because he was my best friend. Brody's family, including his father, never publicly commented on the case. Several family members declined interview requests. His father did testify in Brody's defense during trial, saying the car really did leak water into the trunk and that this could explain the stain. Outside the courtroom, he remained silent. Shortly after the arrest, Brody's attorney was approached by the press and also declined to comment. Brody was transferred to the Vanderburgh County Jail in Indiana while awaiting extradition to Illinois. On September 25th of that same year, an Illinois grand jury indicted Brody on 6 charges: 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death, and 2 counts of residential burglary. Prosecutors alleged that Brody entered Megan's house on the night of July 3, 2014 and strangled or suffocated her to death. Afterward, they argued, he transported her body in the trunk of his car to Boylston and buried her in a shallow grave in a rural area. The prosecution's theory was that Megan and Brody had planned to run away together that night. Megan withdrew the money, packed a bag, and was ready to leave. But at the last moment, Brody backed out. The two argued. Megan may have become emotional and upset, and Brody lost control. In court, he pleaded not guilty. The trial began on October 3, 2022 at the Wayne County Courthouse in Fairfield. Judge Michael Molt presided over the case and warned jurors that it would be difficult and complex and would likely last around 2 weeks. 29 people were called for jury selection. Only 8 were selected on the first day. Many had already heard about the case because Fairfield is a very small town and nearly everyone knew Megan's story. Brody's defense attorney, Christian Burrell, attempted to move the trial to another county. He argued that publicity surrounding the case, including an episode of NBC's Dateline, had influenced the local population. He also requested permission to hire an expert to conduct a phone survey intended to prove jury bias. The request was denied. The trial lasted 2 weeks and included testimony from 38 witnesses. The prosecution was led by Assistant Illinois Attorneys General Michael Falagaro and Myra Yell Clark. Their argument was straightforward. Megan and Brody had planned to run away together. Megan withdrew cash and was prepared to leave, but Brody changed his mind. They argued. He lost control and killed her. Katie never fully believed that version. She knew Megan and Brody had talked about running away, and the text messages proved that, but she did not believe Megan truly intended to leave that night. She pointed out that Megan was only 15 days away from turning 16. It was the birthday she had been waiting for her entire life, because she would finally be allowed to officially date. Why would she run away 15 days before that? Katie believed something else happened. She believed Brody asked Megan to meet him that night, that he convinced her to withdraw money because they supposedly needed to leave immediately, and that when Megan hesitated, when she realized she did not actually want to leave her family, Brody exploded. Katie believed Brody could not accept being told no, but prosecutors stayed with the theory of a mutual plan because the text messages supported it and because it fit the physical evidence: the cash withdrawal, the note, and the erased phone. One prosecutor later said during trial, she had gone to the ATM, packed her bag, and was ready to leave. So when Brody changed his mind, you can imagine how she reacted. She became emotional. At some point, he completely lost control and responded violently. The prosecution presented the 7,000 text messages. They presented the blood found in the trunk. They introduced the recordings made by Skylar, and they highlighted the multiple conflicting stories Brody had given investigators over the years. Then they presented another key detail. Brody had told several people that on July 3rd, he went to Megan's house around 9:30 p.m. to look for her. He said this to explain that he had already started searching after she supposedly ran away. But 9:30 p.m. was the exact time she disappeared. Prosecutors argued that by placing himself at Megan's house at that moment, Brody had effectively placed himself at the likely crime scene. The defense argued that all of the evidence was circumstantial. They said there was no direct proof Brody killed Megan. They argued that the blood in the trunk could truly have resulted from a sexual encounter. They said Brody had no motive, and because the body was severely decomposed, there was no direct physical evidence of strangulation. The defense portrayed Brody as an awkward teenager under intense pressure, surrounded by rumors that linked him to Megan's disappearance. They argued he became nervous during questioning, and that was why his stories changed. He was confused and scared. Then on October 12th, the defense took a major risk. They put Brody on the witness stand. He testified for hours. He repeated the explanation about the blood in the trunk, repeated the story about throwing the shirt into a ditch, repeated that he had nothing to do with Megan's disappearance. During cross-examination, prosecutors confronted him with every version he had ever told, every contradiction, every lie. The next day, closing arguments were presented. The jury began deliberations at around 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., they were back. It took only 1 hour. The verdict was read: guilty of first-degree murder. Brody showed no emotion. He remained seated and still. Katie cried. She sat in the front row beside her mother, and they embraced. Gerald, Megan's stepfather, was there too. He had testified about the day Megan disappeared. Megan's biological father, John, had been eliminated as a suspect early in the investigation and chose not to attend the trial. On the opposite side sat Brody's family. His father, who had testified in support of his son, was present. After the verdict, they gave no statements to the media. Skylar was not present that day, but he had testified 2 days earlier in one of the most tense moments of the trial. He spoke about everything: his friendship with Brody, recording those conversations, and Brody suddenly offering that theory. The prosecutor asked him how it felt to betray his best friend. Skylar answered that he was not betraying his best friend. He was seeking justice for Megan. Katie left the courthouse crying but relieved. After 8 years, justice for her daughter had finally arrived. On January 25, 2023, Brody returned to court for sentencing. Judge Michael Molt said he was deeply disturbed by all the evidence. Several letters were read in Brody's defense. Friends and family described him as a good person who deserved another chance. Brody also spoke briefly. He said, "I am incapable of committing murder, but I do not feel completely innocent." Katie read her own statement. She spoke about the pain of losing her daughter and spending years imagining what happened. She talked about never getting the chance to give Megan a proper funeral. The judge stated that he considered all mitigating factors. Brody had been 18 at the time. He graduated with honors, went to college, held a job. But the judge also considered that Brody hid the body for years, that he lied repeatedly, and that he did not appear to show genuine remorse. In Illinois, first-degree murder carries a sentence ranging from 20 to 60 years. The judge sentenced Brody to 50 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Under state law, he would become eligible for parole only after serving 85% of the sentence. In practical terms, that means he would not become eligible until 2073, when he would be 77 years old. The defense immediately requested reconsideration. It was denied. Then they appealed based on 3 main arguments. First, that the trial should have been moved because local residents knew too much about the case. Second, that Brody should have received a special hearing because of his young age at the time of the crime. They requested application of protections established in the United States Supreme Court decision Miller v. Alabama, which limits life sentences for juvenile offenders. Third, they argued that 2 of the 3 murder counts should be vacated because there was only 1 victim. The Illinois Court of Appeals reviewed the arguments. Regarding the venue issue, the court ruled that Brody failed to prove it was impossible to find an impartial jury in Wayne County. The fact that some people knew about the case did not automatically mean prejudice. Regarding protections for young offenders, the court ruled that Miller v. Alabama applies only to defendants under the age of 18. Brody was already 18 years and 3 months old when Megan disappeared, so he did not qualify. Regarding the multiple murder charges, the court agreed that it was technically incorrect, but the additional charges did not result in any extra punishment. The 50-year sentence was based on a single murder conviction, not all 3. The other 2 counts were considered redundant and did not change the practical outcome. As a result, the appeal was denied, and the conviction was upheld. Today, Katie still lives in the same house in Fairfield. Every July 18th, on Megan's birthday, Katie visits the cemetery, brings flowers, and sings the same songs Megan used to sing in the church choir. She says her daughter had a beautiful voice and that she will never forget it. Since Megan's death, Katie has worked to keep her daughter's memory alive. She created the campaign Megan to Millions with the goal of helping millions of people learn Megan's story and know that her killer was convicted. She has also helped raise funds to build a memorial shelter in Megan's honor at Love of Mike Park in Fairfield and on the grounds of New Hope School. In interviews, Katie said she believes it would be meaningful to create a place where families can spend time together and build good memories. She says she tries to focus on helping other people smile. She also said that her greatest pain is not only losing her daughter, but never truly knowing exactly what happened that day. And she added, "Whatever you value, make sure you value it every single day, because when you wake up, you never know whether that will be your last day with them." In October 2023, NBC aired a special episode of Dateline about Megan's case. The episode was titled The Note. Katie and Skylar participated in the interviews, and it was the first time Skylar publicly spoke about secretly recording Brody. As mentioned earlier, Skylar returned to Fairfield, graduated from law school, and rarely speaks publicly about the case. But when he does, he says he made the right decision, that Megan deserved justice, and that his entire friendship with Brody had been built on a lie. Today, Brody is serving his sentence at Menard Correctional Center in Southern Illinois. He will become eligible for parole on October 7, 2070. After that, he will remain under supervised release for another 3 years. One thing about this case is that there is a large amount of evidence pointing toward him, but much of it is circumstantial. Even with the blood found in the car, he never confessed. He never explained what truly happened that day. Megan was only days away from turning 16, and all her family has left are theories about what happened that night, because he never chose to explain or confess. Fairfield, that small town where everybody knew everybody, was never the same after what happened to Megan. If she were alive today, she would be 28 years old. She would probably have graduated, gotten married, and maybe even had children. But she never even made it to her 16th birthday.